Comic Boom.
Hey guys, Comic Boom here to review Superman Year 1 by Frank Miller. This is it. This is the big event that I've been waiting for quite a while. Frank Miller writing Superman. I mean, we gotta remember when Frank Miller wrote Dark Knight Returns back in the early 80s, mid 80s, it basically revolutionized the writing of Batman. I mean, it basically made Batman dark. And Frank Miller's never really focused on Superman before. I mean, he's written a little bit about Superman in The Dark Knight Returns, in DK1, DK2, and DK3, The Master Race. The Kryptonians, surviving Kryptonians came to Earth in DK3, The Master Race, and Superman was really sort of given an elevated boost there, and was wrote in a very iconic fashion in DK3. And what's interesting about Superman Year 1 is that Frank Miller says that this Superman story, this origin Superman Year 1 story, which takes place over 3 issues at 64 pages each, that basically this is within the continuity of the Dark Knight Returns universe. So this is the origin of Superman as seen in the early years, well before the events of Dark Knight Returns. So that's kind of interesting. So we already know how Superman ends up, if in fact that is the case. We know that ultimately he ends up while going through the events of Dark Knight Returns, DK2, DK3, The Master Race, and ultimately ends up with Wonder Woman. And so it's kind of interesting to see how, with his early years here in Year 1, how Frank Miller was going to write it. Also, I was really curious to see how John Romita Jr.'s art would be in this particular story. So how is it? Well, first of all, let me just tell you right off the bat that I am going to talk about the comic book, so there's going to be spoilers in this review. So just a friendly warning. So if you haven't read it yet, you might want to just watch my review later, or because I do give some spoilers. Now, it's 64 pages long. There's a lot of pages in this opening issue. But overall, I gotta say, John Romita Jr., I've never really been a huge fan of his artistic style, but I have to say that if this is probably the best that I've ever seen John Romita Jr.'s art. Now, that doesn't mean that it's spectacular at all. I'm not gonna say that, but I do like it. And I actually became acclimated to it right away. I thought, I was surprised how much I actually enjoyed the art. Even at times I thought it was odd. I thought the way young Clark Kent was portrayed here, he always seemed to have a big head. He's got an extra big head. I don't know if I've ever seen a kid have as big a head as John Romita Jr. draws Superman in a young Clark Kent. Sorry, there is no Superman in this issue. A young Clark Kent in this issue. He's got a really big head. I found that odd, which is kind of funny because there's another character in the story that has even a bigger head than Clark Kent, and Clark Kent actually puts a helmet on him and has to force the helmet open to put it on this fat kid's head. But in any event, here's the thing, guys. This is a Black Label comic book, and it's extra size, and it's pretty cool. And it's beautifully laid out. You get a lot of pages here. But I have to say, what's immediately surprising about it is that Frank Miller's story is not particularly hardcore. Nothing really stands out about it. I thought it was he played it very, very safe. And maybe it's because it's Frank Miller, but I really expected a little bit more. Now, it's not that it's a bad story. I actually enjoyed it. In fact, I have to say, if I'm brutally honest, I was glued to it. I never took any breaks. I read it from beginning to end, and I enjoyed it. And one thing about it is that even though it's called Superman Year 1, this is actually Superman when he was born. It's actually not Superman's first year as Superman, which is what I thought it was going to be. It really is an origin. It really starts right from young Kal-el's point of view, as Krypton is dying, as Jor-El and Lara are putting him in the ship, as he's watching through his young infant eyes. Young Kal-el is remembering, and you're experiencing the destruction of Krypton through Kal-el's eyes. And I have to give full credit to John Romita Jr. here. I thought he did a really, really good job. His best work I've ever seen from him, showing the experience of young Kal-el as Krypton is dying, as Jor-El and Lara are putting him in the ship, and as he's rocketed away from the doomed planet Krypton, as it explodes behind him, you can see through young Kal-el's eyes. And there are some illustrations here that are just absolutely breathtaking. truly, genuinely gorgeous. There's one particular page where it shows Kal-el, young Kal-el's eyes reflected off his rocket ship as he's peering into the void of space and the beautiful stars, and as the rocket ship continues to blast through the various galaxies on its long warp drive to Earth. And it's just really some really beautiful illustrations here, I gotta tell you. Now, which is why, throughout the issue, there'll be some beautiful illustrations, and then you'll get some pages and sequences that are really awkward, where the art's a little bit more awkward, and sometimes it's a little clunky, and sometimes it's a little off, and then all of a sudden there'd be a spectacular page. So overall, though, it worked for me. The art worked for me, and I actually enjoyed this. I enjoyed this story. But having said that, though, I'm going to say that with a little tinge of disappointment, because there's no real super wow moments, not really big wow moments, which really surprised me. Now, I don't know if I'm supposed to be surprised or but I was expecting it, and it's probably because it was Frank Miller, and maybe that's an unfair thing to say. Is that unfair? Frank Miller, this is a Black Label comic, so I thought it was going to be a little bit more risky. I thought there was going to be more violence. I thought this was going to be maybe a young Clark Kent, a young Kal-el, a young Clark Kent with a little bit of a darker edge to it. Still a good guy, but a young man who maybe comes of age with a little bit more of a darker streak, and through some more overcoming some darkness to become good. But he was really a vanilla sky guy right from the very beginning. That's how Frank Miller writes him. That right from the beginning, Jor-El and Laura almost are perfect parents. They rocket him off to Earth. Comes to Earth. Jonathan and Martha Kent here, they're portrayed as a religious, God-fearing couple. And it's almost as if they know that their son is destined for godlike greatness. And it's like when at the end, when Clark Kent basically goes off to the Navy to join the Navy, and because he wants to see the ocean, it's like they just accepted that they always knew they couldn't hold back their son because they knew that he was destined for greatness. Now the story itself, I found it. What's interesting here is how fragile, things that stand out in the story for me is how fragile Clark Kent finds us humans. And he loves the earth, he loves beauty, and he can see how vulnerable we are. We're so soft, our tissues and our muscles are so soft. We break, we humans, we break so easy. As I love the way how Frank Miller writes the story, how you can really see and appreciate how Clark Kent sees us. He sees us as vulnerable. He sees us as being very breakable. And that's why he does treat us with kid's gloves. And he doesn't say it with contempt, he says it with compassion. He doesn't want to hurt us. And Clark Kent is really, really pushed to the limit and tempted here to do harm to some bullies at Smallville High School. And in fact, bullies that will ultimately come up to be almost rapists and potential murderers here. Now, there was no rape here. There was probably an attempted rape of Lana Lang, but Clark Kent stopped that. And he stopped that in a very non-violent manner. The few times when he does use violence to sort of get some revenge on some bullies, he ultimately discovers that the more violence he uses, that the worse he makes the situation. So when he was violent against the bullies, he gained a reputation as a tough guy temporarily, but the bullies then got worse. They retaliated worse, and he realized it never worked. And you see the early signs of him maybe potentially being a reporter, some foreshadowing of it, because ultimately what works against the bullies is Lana Lang taking some pictures. And so you get some illusions there that, of maybe being a reporter, like, the revelation of the truth. How do you get to the truth of a matter? Well, you don't need to use violence. You can use, in this case, it was a camera, exposing. You expose the bullies. You reveal them for the bullies they are, and the truth will set you free. The truth will, move toward justice. It's the quest for justice it's the quest for truth that will lead to justice. And you see hints of that in the story early on, and you can see sort of a foreshadowing where ultimately I think that he'll end up being a reporter at the Daily Planet. Surprise, surprise. Very interesting. I really like the relationship, how it developed between him and Lana. This was probably the best rendition of the Clark Kent Lana Lang high school dynamic than I've seen in a very, very long time. Lana Lang is a character that I think in many ways gets short thrift by a lot of writers, but this, you could really see how Lana Lang loved Clark Kent, but you could also see how Clark Kent truly was destined for something greater than just being in Smallville. And for the first time, this story did something better than any Superman story I've ever seen in showing that Clark Kent. By the end of this story, I could sympathize with Lana Lang, who basically cried as Clark Kent, as she knew that Clark Kent was not going to be returning to Smallville, even though he promised her that he would, because she too knew that he was destined for something special. Because of course she too knew his powers, and he did reveal them to her. And certainly Clark Kent's parents knew, Jonathan and Martha Kent knew that their son was destined for a greatness that was far beyond them, and that he was truly a gift to the world. And you really got a sense of that here. So I got to give Frank Miller credit for that. I really resonated with, I felt this story. I thought that the story itself worked for me. Now, at the same time, this story is not going to surprise people. I don't think it's going to break any boundaries. I don't think it's going to shock people. Again, for a black label adult, like if you have, for a black label title, I don't know if this is going to necessarily going to be opening up a lot of eyes. But I do think this. I do think that this is worth, it's well worth a buy. I do think I do think that most people will enjoy this when they read it. I really think that for a first-time reader just wanting to read about Superman, they're going to really enjoy this. They're going to enjoy this because I got to say, like, this opening issue, I mean, you could go in completely cold and just, this is a great introduction to Superman. I mean, the early years of Superman, on the Superman right up to the time that he leaves Smallville. This is great. This is the first arc. This is the first act of a movie. This is really, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Now, the art, I gotta say, John Romita Jr., I do think it was a mistake using him as an artist. Even though it's his best work to date, he's a mediocre artist. He's someone who, this should have been given to a higher caliber artist. I mean, there are so many extraordinary artists out there. I would have loved to have seen, Lee Weeks do this, or Clay Mann in particular. I think would have been spectacular. There's all, I would love to see Darwin Cook do this. Man, if Darwin Cook was here, man, I wish that guy was still alive. I can definitely see him drawing this. There's a number of artists here that I would really think would excel at this. I gotta say, John Romita Jr. would not have been someone that I would have chosen for this. But again, I think it works. I think it works. But at the end of the day, I'm going to give this a 6.5 out of 10. I enjoyed it. I do recommend it. And guys, let me know what you think. I thought this is this doesn't blow me away, but it was a feel-good story. It felt good. I didn't feel negative. This isn't a rant. This is more of a rave. And again, I enjoyed this story so much. I even enjoyed John Romita Jr.'s art because it did have some high points there, and there was some extraordinary art. There were parts of this where the art I thought was extraordinarily good, and then other parts I thought it was somewhat subpar. So it was kind of a mixed bag all over the place, I thought. But overall, I'm pleased with it. So guys, tell me what you think of Superman Year One. Give me a comment below and hit the subscribe button. Follow me on Twitter at Metropolis40. And until next time, Comic Boom out.